to the In a Nutshell Daily Podcast with myself, Andrew Davis, and Chris Branch, where we focus and strip off all the techie talk around generative AI and really make it relevant to the everyday person, marketers, and content creators. We get one thing off our chest every single day, and we kind of look at what is relevant at that particular time. And one thing that we're going to be talking about today is AI in sport. And this is a very interesting topic right now because AI, especially generative AI, is taking over many different subjects, different industries, different channels, and sport is definitely one that's being affected. So, Chris, what's your thoughts on AI in sport? How do you see it developing?
It's one of the most natural fits, like marketing. I feel like sports was very data related before we got here, and that's where I felt marketing was as well. You know, marketing has always been data heavy, reliant, and then using it to its best current capabilities with the platforms that existed before AI. And so sports seems to be very much in that same vein. It seems like we're seeing loads of different examples pop up in sport, and we looked at one of the in a previous episode we looked at an AI generated voice, but in this case we've seen headlines around data. So they're very different types of information to be working with for AI. And in the case of data, obviously spotting patterns in data is something AI is very good at, and feeding lots of data into an AI model in order to see nuances and potentially see things that humans don't see. So yeah, very natural seems like to me. Data plus AI plus sport equals very natural.
But do you think it's going to become too data driven? The reason I say that is because recently I read an article. I'll quickly summarize the article. So essentially, the NFL, in collaboration with Amazon Web Services, is utilizing advanced AI algorithms and tools through next-gen stats to glean profound insights from our games. The initiative aims to delve deeper into a player's performance and game strategies by assessing elements like the pressure in football. By exploiting AI's potential, the endeavor provides intricate details about players' responsiveness, aggressiveness, and high speed, surpassing conventional statistics the way they approach it. High-tech tools such as RFID tags contribute to real-time data extraction, facilitating instant, impactful insights. Essentially, what it's saying is that we're going to be using AI to get more and more data. Sounds great, but when it comes to data, if you think about it really, when it comes to data and sport, it's always been there. One of our favorite films we was talking about before this episode is Moneyball. I don't know if you've seen Moneyball. If you haven't, don't worry, we're not going to spoil it. But essentially, it's about using data to help a underperforming baseball team. Brentford and Brighton, I think they've both got data guys. I know that Brighton, they've got like a poker player who is very data driven, and they're using that to great success. But are we at the point where we're going to become too over-reliant on data? Is that because data can lie or data can tell you certain things, but in a real life match environment, sometimes the data doesn't always work. Because if it did always work, the bookies would be broke. So
it's within
it doesn't
context,
always work,
isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the best bits of data I saw recently was someone had been analyzing Messi and his performance in the MLS and how much he walks on the pitch and that he walks more than any other person. But that's because he's got such a good footballing brain that he knows where to be, and so he doesn't have to expend as much energy tracking back and doing other things. So he's just got, 20 years or however long his career has been of top level football where he can walk around the pitch where others need to jog. And if the AI saw that, it would maybe class that as lazy or something like that. And, whereas contextually, that's the reason for it. So it's much like everything. It's a subjective field, isn't it? Yeah. Data is only so good, as you say, and overusing it's definitely as dangerous as underusing it. In fact, it could be more dangerous if you make every decision based off data and not gut instinct or visuals or context or other things like this.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to sports people, regardless of the sport, what makes somebody elite? A lot
Mhm.
of to do with time and how they
Mm.
utilize time, because they know that if they have time, it buys. Well, if they get space, they get time. If they get time, they've
Mhm.
got more time to think. So that's why they can come up with those decisions. You look at for me, I'm football or soccer, depending on where you're watching this or listening to this. And the best players, the Zidanes, the Iniestas, the Messis, as you said, Fabregas, they had a lot of time.
Mm.
They might not have the physical attributes as, let's say, like a Haaland or a Thierry Henry, like running down. Like they don't have that physical attributes. But what they do have is the footballing brain to get time. Now,
Mhm.
stats might tell you different. Stats might tell you, or data might tell you many different things. So it's going to be interesting to see how these AI generated algorithms are going to use the data. And I think that's where it goes
Mm.
down to that human interpretation. Will data ever
Yeah.
be at that point where it can really give it the eye test?
Well,
You
and
know?
as you said, like in the Brighton case, they're clearly using a lot of that data to inform their decisions. But I guess it would be ultimately down to a coach of a football team how much they want to use that data, to inform their decisions, or how much their gut instinct gets involved, or their visual information and their context and background.
Mm,
Because I think one of the important things you just touched upon there, and there's also a parallel here with like UFC fighters, is imagine that you had an odd style, but that you've become incredibly efficient at that.
yeah.
You don't typically fit the attributes, like you said, of a Haaland or someone that's like physically, easily to, sort of data quantify that thing. And say you were just a middle-aged fighter with a middle body build, but you'd found a technique that you'd really honed and become very efficient at, and that people couldn't work out. Then that's actually a good strategy.
Mm,
Whereas on paper, in data, that may not necessarily seem that convincing.
yeah.
Actually, it's something that in real life plays out that way. So I
Yeah.
think
I
it's
think,
fascinating to see where that balance between we now know more than we ever did and AI can crunch the numbers,
yeah.
but I still want to trust my gut instinct and go with what I know is good, from my history of all this.
Exactly. I think when it comes to this new type of data, I think they're going to go beyond the kind of data that was there before. As
Mhm.
it said, looking at the pressure, how it feels the pressure, but everyone deals with pressure differently, and how
Mm.
they get that pressure, I don't know. How they'll find it out for each player, whether it be heart tests or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
But as I said, the elite, they know how to deal with pressure in their own
Mm.
unique way. I actually think a lot of the stats is more to do with content creators. You're going to
Mhm.
have a lot more content that's available on the internet or wherever it may be, and the stats is something they can talk about because most content creators don't own the rights to put a football game or an American football game or a baseball
Mhm.
game or whatever within their YouTube video or wherever it may be. So, but they can talk about statistics and data and try and make that as interesting as possible and tell the story that way.
Mhm.
But I think that when it comes to what we're doing, when it comes to, when I say we, when it comes to sports and I think to summarize everything in a nutshell, the real magic is we can have all of this data, but the real surprise is not knowing the final result. And that is where the magic of sport really takes you.
Mm.
All this data is irrelevant um, if the result, if we don't know the result and the result changes what the data actually
Mhm.
states.
Too many variables for data.
Exactly.